Imagine standing at the foot of Mount Gundabad, where the echoes of ancient battles still resonate through the icy winds. This is not just a mountain, it's a battleground steeped in blood and honor, where dwarves fought valiantly against the relentless tide of orcish invaders. But what if I told you that the true story of Gundabad is far more complex than a simple clash of good versus evil? Join me as we uncover the forgotten war that shaped the fate of dwarves and orcs alike, revealing secrets that have been buried in the frost for centuries. Before we continue further, if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, it would mean the world and help us share more tales of Arda. Now, let's return to the story. The clang of iron upon iron rang out, echoing through the hollows of the mountain that had once been sacred to Durin's folk. The air was thick with ash and smoke, for the fires of the orcs burned in the forges that had been stolen from the children of Aule. And there, in the heart of chaos, stood a company of dwarves, bearded, broad-shouldered, and unyielding as the very stone beneath their feet. "Hold fast, sons of the mountain," cried Fundin, captain of the Iron Hills, as he hewed an orc in twain with his great axe. His voice carried above the clash, steady as a drumbeat in the storm. "This is Durin's crown we defend. Let no darkness claim it." The orcs came on in waves, clad in crude armor, their shrieks like the cries of carrion birds. Among them strode their war chief, Skarjul the Cruel, whose helm was crowned with the horns of a slain aurochs. His blade was blackened steel, reeking of poison and malice. With every swing, he sought to break the line of dwarves, to scatter them like stones before a flood. But the dwarves did not yield. Shoulder to shoulder, they formed a wall of oak and iron. Arrows rattled against their mail, spears struck sparks from their shields, yet their axes rose and fell with grim precision, and their battle song thundered louder than the storm. "Baruch Kazad, Kazad Imenu." The cry reverberated against the cliffs, rolling down into the valleys below, where the echoes seemed to awaken the very roots of the mountain. For Gundabad was no common stronghold. It was the first dwelling of Durin the Deathless, father of their kind, the cradle of their people. To see it profaned was a wound deeper than any blade could cut. As the night wore on, the battle raged without mercy. The ground was slick with rain and blood, and torches sputtered in the storm. A dwarf named Bofri, son of Brogni, staggered back, his shield split and his arm numb from the weight of blows. Yet, even as despair touched him, he remembered the words of his father, "Stone endures, so too must we." With a last cry, he swung his axe and felled an orc before falling himself beneath the press of enemies. And so the battle was fought not only with steel, but with memory, with the remembrance of fathers and forefathers, and the unyielding pride of a people who refused to be erased. At dawn, the cries of the orcs faltered, for the dwarves had not broken. Gundabad's slopes were littered with the fallen, and though victory could not yet be claimed, the courage of that night was carved forever into the heart of Dwarven song. The smoke of battle had not yet cleared when the stories of heroism began to take root in the hearts of the survivors. For every dwarf that fell, a memory was etched into stone, into song, into the very veins of Gundabad itself. And among these dwarves, a few stood apart, not only for their skill with axe and hammer, but for the weight of their choices and the courage of their hearts. Fundin, the captain of the Iron Hills, bore the scars of 100 battles, yet none so seared his soul as the night of Gundabad. He had once walked the halls of Erebor, apprenticed under the master smiths, learning the secret song of metal and fire. Now he fought not for gold or glory, but for the honor of Durin and the memory of the fathers whose names whispered through the halls of their ancestors. His eyes, dark and resolute, scanned the field, reading the tide of battle as a master might read the veins of ore in a mountain. Beside him, young Dane, brother of a fallen comrade, pressed forward with the fury of grief sharpened into steel. He had not yet seen his 20th year, and yet the mountains had already tempered him as iron is tempered in the forge. He remembered his brother's last words: "Even when the halls fall silent, the song must live." And so he sang with each swing, a hymn of defiance, cutting through the ranks of Skarjul's orcs with a precision that belied his youth. Skarjul, the orc war chief, was no mere brute. Born beneath the shadow of Gundabad itself, he had risen from the lowest pits of the dark mines, clawing his way to power through cunning, cruelty, and an unyielding lust for dominion. In his mind, the dwarves were intruders and dreamers, clinging to ancient pride while the world beyond trembled at his command. Every strike he made carried the echo of vengeance for the slights of centuries, and the fire of ambition burned in his eyes, hotter than the forges that once fed the dwarves' craft. Yet, even among enemies, the narrative of heroism was complex. Skarjul's second-in-command, Urgosh, faltered in the night, struck not by fear, but by doubt. For he had seen dwarves kneel to the mountain and whisper prayers of honor, and in those quiet moments a sliver of reverence pierced his heart. Why do we not fight for something greater than conquest, he wondered, even as he swung his blade in obedience to the chief. And thus the battle was not merely a clash of axes and swords, but of stories, of legacies intertwined with rage, sorrow, and devotion. Each dwarf carried the weight of generations, each orc the shadow of ambition, and every choice bore the echo of consequence. When the dawn broke, the survivors would carry more than wounds. They would carry the knowledge that in every swing of axe or sword, in every chant or prayer, they had written their part of history upon the bones of the mountain. The songs that would later rise from these knights of steel remembered not just victory or loss, but the essence of courage itself. In taverns beneath the hills, in candle-lit halls of the forges, bards would recount how Fundin's axe sang through the smoke, how Dane's youthful valor turned the tide of a skirmish, and even how Skarjul's fury became a warning of the perils that shadowed those who sought dominion without honor. It was said that the mountain itself seemed to breathe in these tales, as if the stones of Gundabad had learned to remember. And in this remembering, the dwarves found identity, not merely in triumph, but in persistence, in fidelity to a way of life that demanded respect for craftsmanship, loyalty to kin, and courage in the face of despair. Thus, the battles of Gundabad were more than mere history. They were a crucible in which dwarves and orcs alike were forged, tempered by fire, shadow, and the inexorable pull of destiny. In the quiet that followed the storm of battle, when smoke curled like ghostly fingers through the shattered halls of Gundabad, the dwarves began to speak, not only of what had been done, but of what must never be forgotten. For the true power of their people lay not only in iron and stone, but in memory itself. Generations before, it was said, Durin the Deathless had walked the peaks of Gundabad, seeing the world as a whole and understanding the hearts of stone. From that moment, the mountain became sacred, a place where dwarves would gather to mark the deeds of their kind. Songs were sung of Durin's wisdom, of battles fought long before memory of men, and of the courage that must endure across ages. These songs, woven in deep rhythm and low harmony, carried the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Bards would recount the night when Fundin's axe struck true amid the storm, how Dane's voice rang out over the clash of steel, and how even the fury of Skarjul became a shadow against which dwarves measured their valor. Each retelling became a strand in a tapestry of legend, binding the living to the dead and the present to the past. One song, still sung in secret halls beneath the mountains, began with words that chilled even the bravest warrior. In the halls where stone remembers, the fire of ancestors never dies. In shadowed forge and shattered crown, the echo of axes cries. It was through these songs that dwarves passed knowledge across generations. Children, scarcely able to lift a hammer, learned of sacrifice, of honor, and of the merciless hand of fate. Mothers would hum low chants as they worked the bellows. Fathers would carve runes into shields. And the elders would recount stories of Gundabad, reminding all that courage was not measured by survival alone, but by fidelity to principle in the face of annihilation. Yet myths are not only born of triumph, they are shaped by mystery. Some dwarves spoke of hidden tunnels beneath Gundabad, of chambers where the first kings had left relics of wisdom and tools of power, sealed by secret keys and ancient magic. Others whispered of spirits, guardians of the mountain, who rose when dwarves or intruders dared defile the halls. These legends were taken seriously, for dwarves knew the world was not silent, and that honor required both vigilance and reverence. Even the orcs, dark as they were, contributed inadvertently to the legends. Tales told of Skarjul's relentless assaults, of his cunning strategies, and of the terrible strength that pressed against dwarves' defenses. In remembering the enemy, the dwarves also remembered themselves, what they could endure, and what it cost to uphold a legacy of courage. Every clash of sword and axe became a story to inspire, a caution to heed, a memory to cherish. And so Gundabad was more than a mountain. It became a shrine, a library of echoes, a testament to the unbroken spirit of dwarves who had endured fire, darkness, and the cruelty of war. In these myths and songs, dwarves found not only entertainment or pride, but identity, a shared understanding of who they were, why they labored in stone and metal, and how they were to face the world, no matter the shadows that rose before them. The songs of Gundabad carried through time, beyond the battles, beyond the ashes, and even beyond the dwarves who first sang them. They became a living pulse of memory, an inheritance that demanded courage, wisdom, and loyalty to endure the ages. And in every hall where dwarves gathered to feast, to forge, or to mourn, that pulse remained, a heartbeat of history that refused to fade. The clang of hammers in distant forges was never merely the shaping of metal. It was the song of a people, the heartbeat of a culture, forged in stone and flame. Even after the fires of Gundabad had dimmed, the dwarves carried the echoes of battle into every aspect of their lives, and in doing so, they transformed survival into art and endurance into tradition. In the halls of the Iron Hills, of Erebor, and in the hidden chambers beneath Gundabad itself, dwarves labored tirelessly. Each strike of the hammer, each turn of the chisel, was a rhythm learned not only from craft, but from the memory of ancestors who had bled upon these stones. The forges glowed with an amber light, casting long shadows that danced upon walls carved with runes commemorating deeds of old. Here, a young smith would etch the name of Fundin into a breastplate. There, a master builder would reinforce a gateway with patterns learned from the last siege. Every creation was a story, every artifact a remembrance. Music, too, carried the memory of war. Minstrels would sit in candlelit halls and sing of the valor of dwarves at Gundabad, their voices deep and resonant, vibrating in harmony with the stone. These songs did more than entertain. They educated, inspired, and reminded each dwarf of the duty they bore. Children would listen with wide eyes as the bards recounted the night when axes sang amid lightning, when shields held against impossible odds, and when courage alone held back the darkness. These melodies were woven into the very identity of dwarves, binding generations with invisible cords of honor and memory. Even the daily rituals of dwarves were shaped by these legacies. Before meals, a quiet word might be spoken in remembrance of fallen kin. Before journeys, a prayer was whispered to Durin and the spirits of the mountain. The architecture of dwarven halls themselves bore the imprint of war. Gateways were built wider and stronger, battlements taller, tunnels deeper. Every corridor, every staircase, every arch reflected not only skill, but vigilance, a perpetual awareness that danger could strike without warning. Yet culture was not only defense. In the midst of hardship, dwarves found joy, humor, and kinship. Feasts were held to honor victories, no matter how small. Songs rang through the halls even when sorrow lingered. The memory of war did not harden them into stone, but tempered them, like the finest steel in their forges. And it was this balance of remembrance and resilience that allowed dwarves to endure, to thrive, and to pass their legacy to future generations. The battles of Gundabad had cost them dearly, lives, resources, even faith in certain alliances. But they had also given the dwarves something priceless, a profound sense of who they were, what they valued, and why the mountains themselves must be defended with heart, mind, and hand. In every carved pillar, in every echo of song, the memory of those who had fought and fallen remained alive. It was a culture molded by fire, shadow, and unyielding courage, a culture in which war and creation were inseparable, each defining the other. And so, as new generations of dwarves took up hammer and song, they did so in continuity with the past. Each act of creation was a tribute to endurance, each melody a hymn to bravery, each stone laid a testament to the truth that identity is forged not in peace alone, but in the trials of battle and the honor with which it is met. The mountain slept beneath the weight of history. Gundabad, though scarred and blackened by fire and blood, remained, as it always had, a sentinel over the northern peaks. Yet in its shadow, the dwarves themselves had changed. Victory, when it came, was never complete. Loss lingered in the halls, in the silences between songs, in the faces of those who returned from the battlefield. Leadership was forever altered by the battles that raged upon Gundabad. Many a proud captain had fallen, leaving gaps that could not easily be filled. Those who survived bore the weight of both command and memory, their decisions measured not by ambition, but by the lessons carved into stone by their forebears. Fundin, though battle-hardened, felt the pressure of guiding younger warriors who had not yet seen the world beyond the mountain. He understood that the courage of one knight could not alone defend against the tides of time. Alliances, once taken for granted, had to be reconsidered. Neighboring clans, once distant, were drawn together by necessity. Old rivalries were set aside in favor of survival and mutual strength. The dwarves' society itself bore the mark of war. Villages that had grown into small towns were rebuilt stronger, fortified not just with stone, but with cunning design. Every wall, every gate, every watchtower reflected a lesson learned in the heat of combat. Even the interior of great halls shifted. Open spaces once intended for celebration were partitioned for defense. Corridors were widened for rapid movement of troops, and armories expanded to store weapons both forged and reclaimed from the enemy. In these changes, dwarves demonstrated that resilience is not only the act of endurance, but also the craft of adaptation. Yet, for all the rebuilding, sorrow was never fully banished. Songs of lament mingled with songs of valor, and bards sang of those whose names were lost to smoke and shadow. Families grieved quietly, leaving tokens of remembrance at shrines within the halls. Young dwarves listened wide-eyed to tales of fallen kin, understanding that heritage is not only carried in gold or gem, but in memory itself. And in these moments, the consequences of war became personal. Courage could save a life, but no bravery could wholly shield a people from loss. Even Gundabad itself bore witness to the cost. The mountain, which had once seemed eternal and unyielding, showed cracks, both literal and metaphorical. Mines collapsed, tunnels weakened, and the echoes of the fallen whispered in the darkness. Reminders that no stronghold, however sacred, is immune to the ravages of conflict. Yet, from this, dwarves learned endurance. Every collapse became an opportunity to rebuild stronger. Every scar, a testament to the persistence of their kind. The battles also influenced dwarves' relations with other peoples. Elves and men watched the northern dwarves with renewed respect, understanding that the courage displayed at Gundabad was not merely martial, but moral, a devotion to heritage, to duty, and to the sanctity of life, even in the shadow of annihilation. In turn, dwarves grew more measured in their dealings beyond the mountains, recognizing that survival often required wisdom, diplomacy, and restraint as much as it required strength of arm. Thus, the legacy of Gundabad's battles was felt not only in scars and stone, but in the evolution of Dwarven identity itself. Their society, tempered by fire and shadow, became more resilient, more thoughtful, and more united. The mountain and its people were forever bound in memory, in loss, and in the unbreakable bond forged through suffering and sacrifice. In this way, the dwarves ensured that the deeds of their ancestors, both heroic and tragic, would guide future generations, shaping a people who would endure, thrive, and honor the memory of those who had fallen in the dark, storm-racked night of Gundabad. Even as the ages passed, and the world beyond the mountains shifted with the coming and going of men, elves, and the shadows of Mordor, the legacy of Gundabad remained alive in the hearts and minds of dwarves. The battles that had once scorched stone and bloodied earth became more than history. They became a living compass, guiding choices, shaping character, and preserving identity across generations. In the great halls of Erebor, the Iron Hills, and the hidden chambers of the Grey Mountains, dwarves would often pause to reflect on the tales of old. Young warriors trained not only with axe and sword, but with song and story, learning that true strength lies in understanding the past as much as in shaping the future. They were taught that honor is not merely the victory of battle, but the courage to act rightly even when the world seems cruel and unyielding. The memory of Fundin, Dane, and the countless unnamed dwarves of Gundabad became moral touchstones, their deeds reminders of what it meant to be steadfast and loyal to one's kin. These reflections also shaped dwarves' relations with the wider world. Where once suspicion and isolation might have prevailed, the memory of shared struggle fostered alliances built upon respect and prudence. Elves of Mirkwood and men of Dale, hearing the stories passed down, recognized the depth of dwarven resilience and wisdom. And though the shadow of greed and ambition still stirred in some hearts, the enduring legacy of Gundabad reminded dwarves that survival and honor require both vigilance and discernment. Even in times of peace, the echoes of war influenced art, craft, and tradition. Smiths created weapons and armor not merely for defense, but as symbols of heritage. Songs recounted both heroism and sorrow, preserving the nuances of courage, sacrifice, and loyalty. Festivals celebrated not only the bounty of the forge and mine, but the memory of those who had given everything to defend the mountains. The dwarves understood that culture itself is a form of resilience, a way to honor the past while preparing for the challenges of the future. In these ways, Gundabad's battles became more than a chapter of dwarven history. They became a prism through which dwarves understood their own identity. Every hammer stroke, every carved rune, every song carried a fragment of that enduring truth, that the strength of a people lies not only in stone or steel, but in the memory, courage, and unity of those who endure together. And even today, when young dwarves stand upon the peaks of Gundabad, gazing across northern valleys scarred by time, they hear more than wind. They hear the voices of ancestors carried on the breeze, the cries of axes in the storm, the whispers of courage that insist that no darkness, no matter how fierce, can extinguish the heart of the mountain or the spirit of its people. In that moment, they understand what every dwarf has always known, that identity is forged in trial, memory is sacred, and legacy is eternal. The stories of Gundabad invite all who listen to reflect on their own courage and honor. How does history shape identity? What burdens and victories define us? In the tales of dwarves, of battles and endurance, we see the enduring truth that who we are is inseparable from the trials we face and the choices we make in the shadow of legacy. The sun dips behind the jagged peaks of Gundabad, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the northern valleys. The wind carries with it the faint echoes of hammers striking stone, of axes singing in the storm, of voices long silent but never forgotten. Here, in the timeless silence of the mountains, the legacy of the dwarves endures, etched in rock, carried in song, and remembered in the hearts of all who call themselves Durin's folk. The battles of Gundabad, though fought in a time of fire and shadow, have left a mark that reaches far beyond the scars of earth and stone. They are more than history. They are the soul of a people who have endured, who have labored in the depths of mountains, who have sung songs of courage and sorrow in equal measure. Every dwarf who lifts hammer, carries shield, or sings the old songs carries a piece of that legacy, a thread that ties the present to a past shaped by trial and valor. And in these stories, we see the truth of Dwarven resilience, that honor is not won solely through victory, but through fidelity to principle, through loyalty to kin, and through the courage to endure when all seems lost. The memory of Fundin, Dain, and the countless nameless warriors becomes immortal not because of fame, but because their actions continue to inspire, to guide, and to define what it means to be Dwarven. As night falls, the torches of dwarves flicker across the mountainsides. The songs of old rise once more, mingling with the wind, a symphony of memory and hope. Young dwarves listen, wide-eyed, as the elders recount deeds of valor and loss. In these moments, history becomes living heritage, and the mountains themselves seem to pulse with the heartbeat of those who have come before. Gundabad's battles are forgotten by many, overlooked in the sweeping chronicles of Middle-earth. Yet for the dwarves, they are never forgotten. They are the crucible in which identity was forged, the proving ground of courage, and the foundation upon which generations continue to build. In remembering, they endure. In singing, they inspire. In living, they honor a legacy older than gold, older than stone, older than even the tallest peaks themselves. And so, as we leave these mountains and the echoes of war behind, we are reminded that history is more than a series of events. It is a living story, a guide, a mirror of courage and sacrifice. For those who listen closely, the dwarves of Gundabad speak still, whispering truths about honor, identity, and the enduring power of legacy. If the tale of Gundabad has stirred your imagination, consider exploring more stories from the vast and wondrous world of Middle-earth. For in every shadowed valley, in every ancient stronghold, there lies a story waiting to be remembered, a song waiting to be sung, and a legacy waiting to endure.